Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get ready to do it. So first we have Trump calls on highly conflicted Intel CEO to resign over China ties from Reuters.com, posted by Ragnar OKXG. And yeah, personally, I think that's kind of, though the government shouldn't be interfering with private business. But with that being said, as I've stated in many past episodes, big business and big government are oftentimes joined at the hip. They are oftentimes one and the same. So yeah, I personally don't think that's how it should be. But ultimately, if big business and big government want to collude, I don't think that's how it should be. But I think that goes against the free market and decentralization, but ultimately people will justify what they justify regardless of the system of government in place. And ultimately, I would also argue that, those in positions of high power are often colluding with those in other positions of high power a lot of the time. And that's important to remember as well. Next we have video shows Department of Justice official urging January 6 rioters to kill cops from NPR.org, posted by Dr. Who 07. And yeah, that just goes to show you how, the government, I think a lot of political conflict in these days is just is theater, and a lot of political violence might just be government entrapment. And this is a good example of that. The Department of Justice official egging on J6 rioters to kill cops. We already kind of saw that with Reyes, but it looks like there might have been other ones as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have LOL, like people couldn't get electricity through a fiery fundamental human trait called trade. It wasn't necessary to systematically oppress, enslave, and slaughter large swaths of the population to do that. For posted by Historical Donut 6758, and that looks like a tweet from Jeremy, linked to a tweet from Jeremy Kaufman. Colonialism and settling the moon are quite similar. In both cases, you're bringing water, roads, electricity to places that would never have had them without you. And now some quote tweeting Western Lensman. CBS host questions if it was a good idea to colonize the moon because we know how the age of colonialism worked on this planet. And yeah, my thoughts on that are, I think a lot of third world countries are better off after they were colonized than before. Like in India, the Indian Middle East, they're kind of conservative today, but back before they were colonized, they were even more arch conservative. And that's why, a lot of people say, no system of values is superior, but I would say that in a lot of sense, Western values are superior because, a lot of traditional values in other places, you get stuff like honor killings and Chinese foot binding, and I personally don't think that's libertarian. So personally, I would agree with Kaufman's take here rather than OP's take of, we could just traded with them. But yeah, I personally, we could have traded with them, but I do think, the culture is something that needs to be inherently, just because a place's culture is what they weren't willing to justify doesn't mean it's necessarily good. Like look at the South Pacific and cannibalism. Historically, the South Pacific they've had a lot of cannibals there. And, I personally think if people want to do cannibalism, that's fine, as long as it's consensual. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that automatically makes it correct. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have OC change in Trump's job approval by party affiliation, posted by Ragnar OKXG. And that's a cross post from the Data is Beautiful subreddit. And yeah, it looks like how much has Trump's job approval changed during his first 6 months of the second term in the U.S. by party affiliation. So during his first month, it was 91% approval for Republicans, and then in the most recent month, July, it was 89%. 47% among U.S. adults in January, 37% among all U.S. adults in July, 46% in January, 23% in July, 6% among Democrats in January, 1% in July. And yeah, that just goes to show you how, Reddit might be pushing that Trump's approval ratings are collapsing, but every president's approval ratings go down over time, especially after the honeymoon period ends. And with that being said, Reddit's really pushing that, the Democrats are going to destroy the Republicans in the 2026 midterms. Well, I would say that, the probably when overall compared to the Republicans in the 2026 midterms, but I don't think it's going to be the destruction that they're pushing it to be. Reddit, if it were up to them, the Democratic Party would probably be the sole legal political party. But regardless, I think the lesson here is that, Donald Trump has shown why, people are dropping support for him, but the Democrats haven't shown any reason of why voters should vote for them. I saw a very good take after the 2024 election where it said, there were many reasons to not vote for Trump, but there were few, if any, to vote for Kamala. And I feel that's where the Democratic Party's at right now. There's tons of good reasons not to vote for the Republicans, but there are very few, if any, reasons to vote for the Democrats. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, in light of events going on for decades, posted by Hexus Pinata, and that's a meme that they posted. Destroy the American Empire, and it's the U.S. flag with the NATO and a bunch of stars of David surrounding it, and then it says restore the American Republic. It's the old American flag with 13 stars and 13 stripes. And I would agree with that, but I think it's easier said than done. The American Empire has kind of always... The American Empire mindset, I would say, has always been kind of there since the beginning, and it got worse after the Civil War and the Second World War. And yeah, personally, I don't know how if it's possible to defeat it at this point. I think the libertarian position is we got to end this American neo-global hegemony and replace it with a decentralized republic that our forefathers intended. But I don't know how realistic that is. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have basically half of the U.S. Congress is in Israel now. No comment, posted by Donald Key. And that looks like a picture of Netanyahu and a bunch of Congress critters. And yeah, I won't say that's half the U.S. Congress. I think there's 538 members of it, or like 535 members or so of it total, because there's 435 representatives, 100 senators. This looks to be 40 or so Congress people with Netanyahu. But regardless, it might be a bit of hyperbole, but it definitely goes to show you how deep in the pockets of Israel a lot of U.S. Congress representatives are. In a lot of sense, they don't represent the U.S., they represent the interest of Israel. And, a lot of people, when I think it was Dela Ramirez, she was in a speech in Guatemala recently. She said, I consider myself Guatemalan before I consider myself American. And Ilhan Omar kind of said the same thing. I consider myself Somalian before I consider myself American. And people came after her for that. And you need to come, but then there's a lot of rightoids who don't come after all these Israel shills, even though they come after the Omar and this Ramirez for saying they're Guatemalan or Somalian before they're American. And that just goes to show you how, you got to be consistent. If someone puts the interest of a foreign power before the U.S., whether it be Guatemala or Somalia or Israel, you got to be consistent. You say shouldn't be allowed. And, I personally think Guatemala and Somalia, that's just one congressperson or one or two congresspeople each. This is like 40 or 50 congresspeople. You gotta say, no, we're not gonna let you puppet us around anymore, Israel. If you want to call it anti-Semitic, that's fine. But, you're not allowed to, we are our own country. We are not Israel West. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Hexif post video on social media featuring pastors saying women shouldn't be allowed to vote from apnews.com, posted by XGHTie737. And yeah, I think that might just be rage baiting on Hexif's part. But eventually, you start to turn off all of the rage baiting, which is kind of hard because it's pretty much just all rage baiting at this point, as is the rest of social media. Then we have frustrated made man pays $20,000 fine if coins weighing over 12,000 pounds, but the town is thinking about handling fee to count it. Whose side are you on? From MoneyWise.com, posted by Mundane Image 13, and they added, malicious compliance, I love it, and no, I don't think there should be a handling fee. The city will just have to figure it out themselves. And I'd agree with that. If the government charges you money, it charges you a fine for anything, you shouldn't be forced to pay it if you don't feel like it. And if you want to pay it with all in pennies, like this guy seems to be doing, I think you should be able to as well. Justify doing whatever you want to. Don't let the government push you around. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Fox has devoted over 7 times more coverage to Sweeney than Epstein's scandal recently. Posted from MediaMatters.org, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, I personally think media managers is kind of an arm of the DNC, like Fox News is of the RNC. But regardless, it just goes to show you how it's all cultural. They always push the culture war to distract people from the issues that really matter, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. Especially since if the Epstein stuff were to be released in full, it would indict so many people that the U.S. people just start seeing the government as illegitimate, which I would argue they should probably be doing already. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump promises Monday press conference that White House will essentially stop violent crime in Washington, D.C. from independent.co.uk, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, I personally guess I could see kind of an argument for that. But the thing is with Republicans, they're like a lot like Democrats in that they're very safetyist rather than they want freedom. Washington, D.C. may be a violent shithole, but the libertarian position is ultimately, it should be up to the people to stop that rather than the state. And yeah, it might be well intentioned, but the state shouldn't be stopping crime. It should be up to the people rather than the state to do that, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Child Protective Services investigator 4 times to see letter codes play outside from Reason.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, I think personally my thoughts on that are, it just goes to show you how CPS, just like a lot of other government agencies, can be weaponized against you if they feel like it. And yeah, personally I do think people should try and protect children, but it's not like the previous post in regards to the crime in DC. It should be the people's job to protect the children rather than that of the state. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have now brace for the full fallout of Trump's global shakedown from telegraph.co.uk, posted by Baton13, and that's a cross post from the economics subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think the fallout's going to be as intense as Reddit is anticipating. I personally don't care for tariffs and all that, but I don't think it's going to be intense as Reddit wants it to be, and I certainly don't think it will cause a revolution, even if I personally don't like them. I personally think, people will just keep keeping on, but Reddit, they'll always share all these doomer headlines that society is about to collapse, but it's like Chicken Little or The Boy Who Cried Wolf. You can always say the sky is falling or the wolf is attacking my sheep, but eventually when you just say it every single day, people are going to start toning it out. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.